morning, friends. Holy shit, I just channeled Mrs. Doubtfire. Welcome back to Loreplay. I'm Dana Pereira, and you know what? I was kind of in the mood for a murder mystery. So I guess if I'm jumping down the rabbit hole, well, I'm taking you all with me. Now, I consider myself a pretty well-rounded person in the true crime space, which makes me pretty ashamed to say that I've actually never heard of this one. Which, it's also possible, I guess, that I've listened to 42 episodes of a podcast on it and can't remember because perimenopause has stolen my brain function. Getting old is super fun. I get to have so many experiences twice. I'm Dana Pereira, your geriatric host that can't remember why the fuck I came into the kitchen. But it doesn't matter because this story does not take place in my kitchen. It takes place in Germany in 1922. Sounds charming, quaint. Maybe there's a beer or fresh bread. Maybe there's Lederhosen. Well, bad news. There's no beer. Only dread. Today, we are talking about the Hinterkaifeck Murders, one of Germany's most infamous unsolved cases. A family of 6, a remote farm, footprints in the snow, a killer who may have lived in the house with the bodies for days. And before we go any further, this is a real family, real people, real suffering. We are not here to make light of that. But we are going to acknowledge when history does something so bizarre that you, as a human being with a pulse, go, what the actual fuck? Because this case is layers. It's psychological horror. It's family tension. It's possible generational trauma. It's secrets. It's also a reminder that if you see a strange set of footprints in the snow leading to your house and not away from it, you do not go to bed. You pack a bag, you grab your kids, you fucking leave. But hindsight is undefeated. So let's set the scene for you. The Hinterkaifeck farm was located in Bavaria, about 43 miles north of Munich. A farmhouse surrounded by woods. No streetlights. The nearest neighbors lived several hundred meters away. Close enough to see chimney smoke, far enough that a scream in the barn at night would just disappear into the wind. Just dirt roads, trees, and silence that stretched too far. This was not a place you stumbled upon. You had to mean to go there. The family inside that farmhouse was the Gruber family, and nothing about them was simple. Inside was Andreas Gruber, he was 63, Cecilia Gruber, who was 72, Victoria Gabriel, who was 35, and she was their widowed daughter, Cecilia Gabriel, who was Victoria's daughter, she was 7, and Josef, who was 2 and was Victoria's young son. And lastly, Maria Baumgartner. She was 44 and the newly hired maid. Literally her first fucking day. Now, before the murders, the Gruber family already had a reputation in the area, and it wasn't one of a perfect family. So let's start with Andreas Gruber, because if this case had a human content warning, it would be him. Andreas was known throughout the village as violent, controlling, cruel, and unsettling. And what a fucking way to describe someone. I'm imagining like standing in a bar, walking down the street, and being in the presence of someone that literally makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I always pay attention to how my body reacts in someone's presence. And if I feel unsettled by anyone, I'm fucking out. P.S. Totally sidebarring this, but this did happen to me the last time that we were in NOLA. This fucking dude and this girl gave me the creeps. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I was like, nope, girls, wrap it up. We're out of here. These guys are up to something. Like, I just knew it. I could feel it. And you know what? Even if I was wrong, no. trust that instinct always, even if it's embarrassing. So, anyways, back to this dude. He ruled his household with fear and religious extremism, which is so weird since those two things never go together. And he had already served prison time, which we will circle back to in a minute. His wife, Cecilia, had been married before. There's mixed info on her first husband, Josef. Some sources say he died, and others that they were divorced, and as part of the divorce settlement, she received ownership of the farm called Hinterkaifeck. Yes, one and the same. The one that later will become the setting for one of Germany's most infamous unsolved murders. So already we're starting strong. Moving on to Victoria, their daughter. On March 11th, 1914, Victoria married a local man, Carl Gabriel. That same day, ownership of Hinterkaifeck Farm was officially transferred to the newlyweds. A fresh start, a new chapter. Love, land, legacy. And then, because history refuses to let anyone relax, World War I erupts months later. Carl is drafted and, just like that, killed in war. Gone. Victoria gives birth to their daughter, little Cecilia, on January 9th, 1915. Carl never gets to meet her. And now, deep breath, because we are about to travel into the realm of deeply disturbing. In 1915, Andreas Gruber, the father, was convicted in district court for having engaged in an incestuous relationship with his own daughter, Victoria, between 1907 and 1910. Yes, incest. And I swear, I am not doing stories on this on purpose. It just comes up an alarming amount of times throughout history. Everyone knew, everyone whispered. Andreas was sentenced to a year in prison. And Victoria, the motherfucking victim, received 1 month. But the story doesn't end there. In 1919, Victoria gives birth to a son, Josef, and things get messy. Not that they're not already messy as fuck. Lorenz Schlittenbauer was a neighbor that had been romantically involved with Victoria after her husband died in World War I. Initially, Schlittenbauer acknowledged Josef as his son. He paid child support, and there were discussions about formalizing their relationship. However, he later withdrew that claim and stopped payments. Why? Because questions about paternity intensified, specifically whether Andreas Gruber could be the father. Some accounts say that Victoria confided in Schlittenbauer that the baby was actually a result of her father's sexual abuse, and then he turned him in, although accounts on that vary. What we do know for sure, though, is that authorities investigate again. However, there was insufficient evidence to convict him a second time. No DNA tests in 1919 or Mari Povich yelling, "You are the father!" So Andreas was released. But, important note, the court denied him compensation for time spent in pretrial detention. In Bavaria, at the time, if someone was detained and then cleared without suspicion, they could seek compensation. The denial suggests that the court believed there was reasonable suspicion, even if it did not meet the burden of proof for conviction. That's not a formal statement of guilt, but it is legally significant. It essentially says we cannot convict beyond a reasonable doubt, but we are not convinced of your innocence either. Which, I mean, cool, and then you sent him back to live in the house with the daughter? It just, I mean, come on, guys, that's so ass backwards. So now we have a farm with a dark reputation. A father previously convicted of incest, a daughter trapped in a scandal, a dead husband from war, a newborn son with disputed paternity, and a neighbor turned lover turned accuser. And that's just the family backstory. We haven't even gotten to the murders yet. In the months leading up to the murders at Hinterkaifeck, things got weird. They got dark, isolated, like something is watching you weird. About 6 months before the killings, the family's longtime maid quit. Now, officially, she left. Unofficially, she ran. She told people she'd been hearing strange noises coming from the attic, footsteps, shuffling, movement when no one was supposed to be up there. She reportedly became convinced the place was haunted. And listen, I love a haunted farmhouse vibe for the aesthetic. Like candles, drafty windows, a moody playlist. But when the attic starts walking around on its own, I'm out. Andreas reportedly searched the attic and found nothing, which either means the house was haunted or someone was very, very good at hide and seek. Then, March 1922 rolls around, and this is just a week or so before the murders. Andreas finds something odd on the farm property. A newspaper from Munich. Not something anyone in that rural area subscribed to, and he was certain that he hadn't bought it. At first, he wondered if the mail carrier had delivered it by mistake, but no one nearby was missing a paper. So now, on our isolated farm, we have footsteps in the attic and a mysterious newspaper with no explanation for how it got there. Either the ghost really likes to keep up on current events, or that's not a ghost. Now, the next discovery, for me, was kind of a slow burn of creepy. Fresh snow had fallen, and in that snow, Andreas saw footprints that led from the forest straight to the farm, specifically to a door leading into the machine room. A door that had a broken lock. Now, at first, I was like, okay, dude, there's like 6 other people in your house. Surely one of them could have left a set of footprints. But then there's the detail that kind of makes the story punch you in the throat. There were no footprints leading back into the forest, just in. So imagine standing there, in silence, snow everywhere, seeing a set of tracks that came out of the woods, stop at your home, and don't leave. It wasn't a route anyone in the family would have taken. And even if someone in the family had walked into the woods and then to the machine room, there would have been prints leading out and in. Later, the family reportedly heard footsteps in the attic. Again. And again, Andreas investigates. But there was no one there. He told neighbors about the tracks, about the noises. But here's the strange part. He refused help. Neighbors offered to stay overnight, to look around, to help him investigate. He declined. He didn't report it to the police, which raises questions. Was he proud? Embarrassed? Hiding something? Or did he genuinely believe he could just handle it himself? We don't know, but we do know the unease in that house was building. The strange happenings don't stop there, though. Another 10 out of 10 creep moment came when a key to the farmhouse went missing. We don't have an exact documented hour it disappeared, but it was noticed sometime in the days prior to the murders and mentioned afterwards in witness statements. And it's not like this key was just used all willy-nilly. The key was kept in a consistent place. It was discovered missing, and it was never officially recovered. And then there's one more detail that feels like a whisper from the dark. A classmate of little Cecilia later claimed that the young girl had said something strange before the murders. She reportedly told her friend that her mother, Victoria, had a violent argument with her grandfather. Now, we already know the relationship between Andreas and Victoria was toxic, abusive, legally documented, and scandal-ridden. We know there were fights. We know there were secrets. So, if there was a violent argument right before the murders, that kind of feels like it matters. It suggests ongoing tension in the household. Some researchers speculate the argument may have involved Joseph's paternity, especially since Schlittenbauer had previously claimed and then denied fatherhood. But obviously, the only people that truly know what happened were in that house, and not a single one lived to say, because within days of the footprints, within days of the attic noises and the missing key, within days of that newspaper appearing out of nowhere, Hinterkaifeck became a brutal crime scene. Not just a murder, a fucking massacre. And the killer either knew the layout of that house or had been living there longer than anyone realized. It's the evening of March 31st, 1922. The air is cold. It's Bavarian spring, which basically means winter is still emotionally present. The farm is quiet. No parties, no visitors, no lantern-lit drama. Just another night in a house that had already been whispering. Inside are 6 people. Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, little Cecilia, baby Josef, and brand new to this horror show, the maid, Maria Baumgartner. Maria had been there less than 24 hours. She didn't even have time to fully unpack her shit. Now, we don't know exactly what time it started, and we don't know who heard what first. But what investigators later pieced together is this. Someone in that house, likely Andreas, heard something in the barn. A noise, a disturbance, an animal unsettling, just something. And one by one, members of the family walked out there. Not together, individually. Which means this wasn't a chaotic, panicked attack. This was controlled, intentional, patient. The first 4 victims found in the barn buried beneath the hay were Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, and little Cecilia. And this was not a quick, merciful killing. The weapon used was a mattock, a farming tool with a heavy metal head, part axe, part pick. Are you picturing it in your head? Because it's sickening. Blunt force trauma to the head, repeatedly. The autopsies later revealed that at least one of the victims, young Cecilia, may have survived for several hours after being struck. Now, after the 4 in the barn were killed, the murderer didn't leave. He, and yes, I am assuming gender at the moment due to the number of victims and the weapon of choice, went inside. In the house were little Josef, only 2 years old, and Maria, the maid, both of them sleeping. They were killed separately. Josef was found in his bassinet, and Maria in her room. No signs of a struggle that echoed into the night, no neighbor reporting screams, no one rushing toward the farmhouse in alarm, just quiet. A quiet so complete that it swallowed everything. 4 entire days passed between the murders at Hinterkaifeck and anyone realizing that something was horribly wrong. Which sounds insane to us now, because if I don't text someone back within 4 hours, they're like, yo, are you alive? But this was 1922 in rural Bavaria. People were busy. Farms were isolated, and if someone wasn't answering the door, you didn't immediately assume axe murderer. On April 1st, which feels almost offensively ironic, 2 coffee sellers, Hans and Edward Sharovsky, arrived at the farm expecting to take a routine order. They knock on the door. Nothing. They knock on a window. Still nothing. So they do what any mildly concerned but not yet alarmed men in 1922 would do. They walk around the yard. They look around. It's quiet, too quiet. No one is outside. No one answers. But the Sharovsky brothers don't investigate further. They're like, meh, not our problem. We got coffee to sell. And they leave. And life, somehow, continues. Meanwhile, little Cecilia hasn't been at school for several days. No excuse, no note, no explanation. And the Gruber family also fails to attend Sunday church. In a small Bavarian village in 1922, that's not subtle. Church wasn't optional, even if you were having incestuous relations with your daughter. It was a weekly roll call for your existence. People would have noticed. They did notice. But noticing is different from acting. Then comes April 4th. A local mechanic, Albert Hoffner, heads out to Hinterkaifeck to repair an engine. This had been arranged in advance. He was expected. He arrives, but nobody is there to greet him. So he waits. For an hour. Now, here's the eerie part. Instead of leaving immediately, Hoffner just does the repair. Alone. On a silent farm. For 4.5 hours. 4.5 hours working on machinery while 6 murdered bodies lay nearby. And he later says he noticed nothing unusual. He just finishes the job and leaves. And still, no one has opened the door. Later that same day, around 3:30 in the afternoon, Lorenz Schlittenbauer grows concerned enough to act. Now, remember, Schlittenbauer had history with this family. Complicated history. Personal history. Emotional history. So he sends his 16-year-old son, Johann, and his 9-year-old stepson, Josef, to check on the farm. Now, luckily, these kids see nothing because talk about the fucking trauma that would cause young boys. They come back and report exactly that. Nope, nothing there, no sign of the family. So Schlittenbauer decides to go himself. But he doesn't go alone. He brings a couple of neighbors with him. 3 grown men walking toward a farm that has gone unnervingly silent. They enter the barn, and that is when everything changes. Inside the barn, they find the 4 bodies of Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, and little Cecilia. All dead, lying in the hay. Now, imagine that moment. The smell, the stillness, the horror of recognition. These weren't strangers. This was their neighbor, part of their community. Shortly after, they search the house, and inside the living quarters, they find Maria and Josef. Schlittenbauer left the scene and alerted other villagers almost immediately. From there, the local authorities were contacted. When the police arrived on the evening of April 4th, 1922, the farm was more than a crime scene. It was a community gathering. The next day, criminal investigators from Munich arrived to take over. Among them were seasoned detectives and a forensic team. I mean, as much as a forensic team could possibly mean in 1922. Autopsies were conducted in the barn itself. Yeah, in the barn, under farm lighting, because nothing says proper evidentiary handling like conducting postmortems next to livestock stalls. The victims' skulls were removed and sent to Munich for further examination. But here is where things take a hard turn into nightmare territory. As officers began examining the property more closely, they noticed something that raised the hair on their arms. The animals had been fed. 4 days had passed since the murders. If the entire family had been killed Friday night, and all evidence suggested they had, the livestock should have been starving or in obvious distress. But they weren't. The cows had been milked. The feed had been replenished. The stable was maintained. Inside the house, dishes had been used. Food was missing from the pantry. The stove had clearly been used after the murders. There was fresh bread cut. And neighbors later reported that smoke had been seen coming from the chimney over the weekend. That means that while 6 bodies lay decomposing on the property, someone was cooking meals and tending livestock. Investigators also find out that the key had been reported missing in the days before the murders. Now that detail felt less like absent-minded farming and more like prelude. The attic was searched again. Remember, Andreas had previously complained of hearing footsteps up there, and now that detail also hit differently. There were indications that someone had been in the attic space. Hay had been disturbed, and there were impressions that suggested someone had laid there. Someone had likely been watching the family before the murders, and living with their corpses after. The killer did not flee. He stayed for days. He slept under the same roof as the bodies. He fed the animals. He kept the farm functioning. He walked through the inside of the house where Maria and little Josef lay dead. And he moved in and out of the barn where the other bodies rested in hay. There was no evidence of forced entry on the main doors. The open machine house door, noted days earlier, now seemed even more significant. The killer likely knew the property, or had been observing it long enough to understand its layout. This wasn't random and hurried. This was controlled. Hinterkaifeck was isolated, yes, but not invisible, which means either the killer left under the cover of darkness through the surrounding forest, or he was someone who could walk away in daylight without raising suspicion. The murderer wasn't panicked. He was comfortable. And in a case full of eerie details, footprints in snow leading only toward the house, missing keys, attic noises, the fact that someone lived alongside the dead for days may be the most disturbing piece of all. And now is when we finally get to ask the question every true crime mystery demands. Who the fuck was responsible for this? Because here's the thing about Hinterkaifeck. This wasn't a random farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. It was a farmhouse full of tension, secrets, and grudges. Let's start with one of the most discussed suspects, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, which honestly, as soon as I read that he was the one that sent kids to find the body and then brought neighbors with him, immediately rose red flags for me. That sounds like a guy that was impatient with the bodies not being found and forced the hand. Maybe not definitively guilty, but definitely worth checking him out hard, in my opinion. Lorenz was a neighbor. He had previously been romantically involved with Victoria. There were huge tensions over paternity. This guy lived in a small town and had to deal with rumors of romantic betrayal, with her own father, mind you, public humiliation, and small town gossip. Add all of that up, and it definitely equals masculinity wounded in the 1920s, which is not exactly a stable cocktail. Not then, not now. After the bodies were discovered, Schlittenbauer behaved strangely. He allegedly moved bodies, handled them in ways that seemed overly familiar. Neighbors say that he was eerily nonchalant and didn't seem at all fazed or repulsed by the bodies. Which, if that's me stumbling in, I'm probably scream crying until I throw up and pass out. He also seemed to have intimate knowledge of the farm, such as knowing exactly which key opened a jammed door. Now, could that knowledge have come from previously being involved with Victoria? Sure, possibly. But during the initial investigation, he allegedly used a key to enter the house alone, raising questions about how he acquired a key. Now, I do question the legitimacy of that statement because it feels like it would have been more heavily weighed as evidence. And also, if I remember correctly, they initially said they never recovered the key. So, anyways, other reports say that he knew how to get into the house without forcing entry, and then he unlocked the door from the inside. Which, in my opinion, isn't that hard. I mean, when I was a teenager, I used to sneak through the window with a dog treat to keep the dogs quiet whenever I snuck out after curfew. There's also speculation that he made a remark that only the killer would say. Allegedly, he mentioned to a neighbor that the killer had tried to bury the bodies, but failed because the ground was frozen. A detail that struck investigators as highly suspicious. But alas, there was not enough evidence to say he was 100% our guy. They didn't find any bloody clothes or anything to tie him directly to the crime scene or murders. It was all circumstantial. Another theory was the drifter theory. Some investigators theorized a drifter had been living in the attic before the murders, possibly watching, possibly waiting. This theory explains the strange occurrences before the attack. It explains the staying afterward. But it requires an unknown person who left no trace and was never definitively identified. It also doesn't explain why the attack was so violent, and why the kids were killed, and why the animals were fed. If it was a drifter, why work on the farm? It wasn't necessary. Unless, possibly, I don't know, they were really trying to stay as long as possible and wanted a fresh glass of lukewarm straight from the tip milk. I don't know. In the realm of possibility, yes. But if it was a drifter, they left cash behind too, which feels like a missed opportunity and a waste of all that hard work murdering. They had to throw out the robbery theory pretty quickly too, because they found a large amount of money in the house. Now, another theory that actually kind of cracks me up is the dead husband theory. Maybe Carl, Victoria's husband, didn't actually die in the war, and then he came back to see her with another child that was not his and killed them all in a fit of rage. Except other soldiers said they saw his body, and if he did rise from the dead and commit the murders, why kill little Cecilia? He could have just taken her with him. And lastly, at least the last of what I'm going to talk about, because truly there's a gazillion theories. One theory was that Andreas murdered the whole family himself and then turned the weapon on himself. He was angry enough and clearly sick enough, and he did have the huge blowout fight with his daughter the week before. But later evidence found that his wounds could not have been self-inflicted. So there goes that one too. There's so many theories floating around and even deathbed confessions. But again, no evidence to back anything up. Students at the Furstenfeldbruck Police Academy re-examined the case with modern forensics. While they did identify one main suspect who they believe committed the murders alone, they chose to keep that name a secret out of respect for his living descendants. Which, no, that motherfucker annihilated an entire family. Even if Andreas, in my opinion, deserved worse than what he got, and possibly the mother too, I don't know if she allowed the abuse, but the rest of them absolutely deserve justice. But it was the police academy, which to me says school, so maybe it was a learning thing and they don't feel comfortable throwing that name out there? I don't, no, I still think they should. Final answer. The fact of the matter is, they have never solved this case, at least not officially. The Gruber family already carried stigma. When you combine isolation, scandal, resentment, possible paternity disputes, a domineering patriarch, you get tension that simmers. The killer did not ransack the house. Money was left behind. This was not robbery. This was targeted, intentional. In 1923, just 1 year after the murders, the house was demolished. It's hard not to wonder if maybe the demolition was also psychological, because that house had become a magnet. Curiosity seekers had trampled the crime scene. People wandered through in the days after the bodies were found. Evidence was compromised almost immediately. It was less controlled investigation and more small town chaos with a crowd. And when a place becomes synonymous with horror, especially in a tight knit rural community, sometimes the only way forward is to destroy it. The land was eventually built on again. New structures replaced the original farmhouse decades later. But the exact spot where the family lived and died is marked today by a small memorial cross. Not flashy, not touristy, but definitely a reminder. The family was already living a nightmare, and they all died in a nightmare with no accountability. I mean, who knows? Maybe we'll hear something at some point in our lifetime. I like to think that the truth has a funny way of coming to the surface. And that, my friends, is the horrors at Hinterkaifeck. I still kind of like Lorenz for the murder, but I don't know. You guys tell me what you think. You can drop your theories on Instagram or tell me on YouTube. Yeah, I totally fucking forgot to tell you because of my geriatric perimenopause brain. I started putting the episodes up on YouTube. So if you are a person that prefers to watch the episodes, you can go to loreplaypodcast.com and click the watch now button. Is it watch now? Watch on YouTube. I don't know. One of the two. It will say watch in it 100%. And until next time, if you happen to hear footsteps in your attic, notice a key is missing, find a newspaper from far away, and see strange footprints in the snow, maybe add all that up and make it equal get the fuck out of there.